Hi everyone, it is December.
Yeet.
Whoa!
Merry Christmas times.
Merry Christmas time. Happy holiday.
I feel like you're about to start singing, and I wasn't really sure where to go with that.
I was singing. Thanks, Evelyn. This is a music podcast now. No, I'm just kidding. So today we are here to kick off our 007 December, and I'm so excited about it. I didn't watch all these James Bond movies for nothing, let me tell you that. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, I forced Evelyn to watch all of them with me, and she's going to join me now all December. How do you feel about that, Evelyn?
I don't know. I mean, I actually like James Bond. I know a lot. There's a lot of film people who are like, I don't like James Bond. Like, he's such a dick, and he's like,
oh my God.
Like, they're just boring action movies, and like, I don't know. I know a lot of people who really don't like James
General
Bond
Patton,
movies.
Plebe. But then again, I don't know what film student is like, my favorite movie is Patton.
I mean, they're probably out there.
They're probably out there, yeah.
Yeah. If your favorite movie is Patton, please comment.
Please
Let
us know. We want to meet you. We want to talk to you about what that's like. But yeah, so today is going to kind of be like a general introduction to the spy genre of movies. Evelyn and I are going to kind of talk a little bit about the history of the spy genre, basic overview history of the Bond films. We're not going to talk about any specific ones today, but tomorrow we're coming at you with Dr. No. Dr. No.
And you'll know a lot of things that you didn't.
Oh my God!
Before.
Oh.
This is gonna be a long month.
The spy genre. Those are pretty good movies, huh, Evelyn? I actually consider Evelyn the Hitchcock expert of all of us.
Which is, I feel like that's an embellishment.
You did a whole Hideo Kojima Hitchcock thing, and you're a really good expert on Hitchcock. Yeah, especially the ones we're talking about.
We went through the same Hitchcock course.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I feel like you've watched more Hitchcock films that weren't included in that course
than I have. Just because you've watched more doesn't mean that you know more. So,
true.
Evelyn and I, we were talking a lot about this, and it's interesting because it plays into, like, James Bond for sure, but I think especially the spy genre as a whole, because everybody kind of has this part of the reason why I wanted to talk about Bond and just go film by film by film is that I feel like we have this general cultural consensus idea as to what something is. But I find that a lot of people don't actually, like, consume the movies beforehand, right? So people have so many opinions on James Bond and how they perceive James Bond to be from this broader cultural context without actually having watched the movies, seen, like, more than one Bond, like, I mean, engaged with it.
There's 23 of them. You'd be forgiven for not seeing all of them.
But like, at the same time, like, not a lot of people have, like, actually seen a Bond film, but they have opinions on it, and that's so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like, especially, that's something I want to push back on the podcast, and, like, I don't know. So, yeah, that's why I wanted to cover all of them, because I also am a film person who, I try not to have opinions on the films that, like, I try not to talk about films I haven't seen. I know it's like a big epidemic, like, I don't know, epidemic, I say it like it's like crazy important, and it's not just like an opinion thing that annoys me a little bit. But nowadays, I notice so many people, like, they read, like, critic reviews, or they engage with, like, film commentary YouTubers, I mean, like, and podcasters, which I'm not talking garbage on myself.
What kind of person listens to someone else's opinions on a film? That is so lame.
But, like, they don't want to engage in, like discourse about it. They just kind of take on those opinions as their own.
Yeah.
I knew somebody who did that a lot with, like, a lot of online reviewers.
Yeah.
And it was just, like, it was difficult to engage in a discussion about film genre and history and art when you haven't experienced the things you're trying to discuss, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like me, I'm not going to go have a discussion about the Godzilla movies. I haven't seen, like, pretty much any. But, like, so I'm not going to, like...
do that in the future?
Yeah, of course. But, you know, I'm not going to, like, act like I know so I can engage in a conversation about it. I'd rather just, like, talk about... You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of happened with my... an article I wrote recently for Scorpia magazine. I was writing about Frank Henenlotter, who's about as far from James Bond as you can get. Right? He released a film that has not had a physical like, I don't think it has an official release. Like, he shows it at festivals and stuff. So I had to, like, cover it without being able to actually cover the film. And, like, had to acknowledge the film without, while also trying to make sure I didn't talk about something I hadn't seen. So, like, yeah, that is... Because I think just because of the way, like... I don't know, just the way, like... stuff is structured where you have lots of information flying back and forth, it's easy to get into that where it's easy to get drawn into conversations about stuff that you don't have information on too.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I get it. Like, there's a lot of movies and it's really difficult. And honestly, this isn't like as serious as if like a doctor who didn't study surgery is performing surgery. Yeah. But it's just like a little thing that frustrates me, you know? I mean, and I get that with Bond, and that's pretty much the background on why I wanted to do the Bond month. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
It's awkward. It is frustrating. And I'd rather encourage people to be literate in their art form or literate in the things they're critiquing, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Especially if you're a film person. Like, I guess that's like, it is an important issue within the film community. To say it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And I like Evelyn because Evelyn, she'll take the step to watch all of them. Because I remember, like, the reason I wanted to watch, like, Nightmare on Elm Street and last year, like, Friday the 13th was because I was like, I feel weird having opinions about this when I had seen it. And Evelyn, with the article for Scorpia, being like, I need to see all of them to develop an opinion. That's so important. But yeah. So, the spy genre is an interesting genre because it is a very niche one, kind of similar to something like, it's way more formulaic than something like film noir, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Especially in lieu of, like, how this James Bond was kind of in the 60s. The type of spy film that James Bond is, it's this, like, heightened reality, almost superhero-esque level of, like, expression of, like, espionage, you know?
Yeah. Although it does, like, especially in, like, the early stages, spy film definitely, like, grew out of film noir. It's kind of like how music, like, you can look at country music and see how, like, it split off into, like, modern country music, but also rock and roll, which split off into heavy metal and into punk, and, like, they branched off into different things, but you can still see kind of some elements of, like, what originally was there.
Yeah.
So, like, noir and spy films, I feel like, are, like, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Just because you made that comparison.
Yeah, just because there's a lot more specific conventions to it. Because when you think of where the spy film came from, so 007 especially defined the spy genre, but what came right before it, and that doesn't get credit for building the spy genre, is North by Northwest by Hitchcock. And that is a thriller film that leans towards the spyness. But the thing about James Bond is it's pretty much the equivalent Hitchcock storytelling structure with various little, like, accoutrements. By that I mean, Hitchcock, you get a plot in which, there's a narrative, there's a femme fatale, or, like, there's a Hitchcock blonde who's, like, vacillates in this liminal space, but is a bad woman doing the same things as the man. You get the wrong man usually in Hitchcock's thrillers, and he has to go on, like, an espionage-esque mission that is kind of based in a MacGuffin. So, like, what is the MacGuffin in North by Northwest? I'm not as fluent in North by Northwest. Is it the Empire State? The Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, the little jade Buddha thing with
the jade Buddha. I was thinking about, a really quick...
was it jade?
Explanation. What I was thinking about...
with Around the World in 80 Days also, but there was a Buddha. It is a Buddha. I can't remember if it's jade or not.
Okay, cool. I was getting it confused with this. There's a short on Showtime, and it's, like, Timothy Leary and Cary Grant doing acid, and they have a Statue of Liberty one, and they're just recreating North by Northwest. So that's why I assumed it was a Statue of Liberty. But that's
or maybe the MacGuffin is his identity.
Oh my god!
That's like
another thing, really quick. Like another example is like Notorious, where it's like a kind of pseudo spy espionage plot, and it's like the MacGuffin of it is like the uranium wine bottles, where like that's the thing that gets the plot technically going. But it doesn't matter by the end for Hitchcock. With the spy genre in 007, it crafts a narrative as if the MacGuffin matters, and that's the one big difference. But what were you going to say about? What were you going to say?
Well, when you really start breaking down Hitchcock, like any movie you look at, you're like, yeah, this is a MacGuffin, but also at least 3 other things in this film could also be considered the MacGuffin, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and so that spy genre, it kind of just like, I don't want to say like simplifies the Hitchcock formula. It just like is a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, and I think something like, at least... Not, as I've been revisiting the Bond films, like, there is more depth there than initially, like, you think.
Yes.
So there's still some element of, like, the MacGuffin doesn't mean as much as you thought, but they do kind of... I guess it's almost like a 2-tier thing. Like, with Hitchcock, he builds the facade, and then he focuses on the thing under it, where with Bond, they have the thing under it, but they also put way more work into the facade so that people... Like, if you want to take it at the facade, you can. Whereas with Hitchcock doesn't let you do that.
That's a totally fair... Yeah, that's a totally fair comparison, I think, or, like, I guess... description of the difference. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I remember, like, Hitchcock, he was pissed. He was so mad when 007 came out. And that's where things like Frenzy came from in the Hitchcock's later career. Yeah. Because when Hitchcock became, like, and not to be, like, rude, but when Hitchcock became more of an irrelevant filmmaker, or I guess, like, he wasn't necessarily at the forefront of his career like he was, because he had so many, like, box office flops and things in his later years, because he was struggling, because he was such a studio filmmaker. So in the new age of film, it was difficult for Hitchcock to work out how to make a movie, you know, or how to make a movie with the increased ability to just show whatever. Yeah. Does that make sense? And so when
Family Plot was great, though. I'm gonna fight for that.
Oh, God. It's okay. Anyway. But, like, when he makes something like Frenzy, it was him kind of trying to push back on the fact that Bond just kind of took from things like North by Northwest, things like Lifeboat, things like Notorious, where Hitchcock kind of was the initial step in developing the spy genre. While Hitchcock wasn't developing the spy genre necessarily, he was establishing the thriller genre. Spy film just pretty much took that formula and plugged it into its own genre, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, so with Bond you get a really interesting thing because, like, Bond, it's long. Like, the series is so long. Like,
yeah, there's 23 of them.
So long, and spans such a long period of time. Like when was, like, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010s.
Yeah.
Like, that's almost 40 years, over 40 years.
Yeah. There's also that weird unofficial one that isn't really a Bond film that was made in the 50s.
Yeah. And so, like, the Bond film
and the books were written in, like, the 40s.
Yeah. So, yeah, Bond comes from a book. So they took the book series and kind of adapted it cinematically so that it would be reminiscent of something like North by Northwest by Hitchcock, but in a more commercialized kind of sense.
Yeah.
But so yeah, with James Bond for a really, really long time, actually, you get the films actually do a really great job at pushing the envelope in terms of storytelling. Like, we'll get into the specifics of this, but I think particularly Goldfinger with, like, Pussy Galore being pretty much a lesbian the entire time, and even just the fact that she's named Pussy Galore and, like, things like that. James Bond was really pushing the envelope in terms of sexuality and X, Y, and Z, because they didn't have to follow the production code because it was technically a European film, it was a British film. So they didn't have the hard and fast rules like somebody like Hitchcock had. So they were able to indulge in that kind of sexuality, that kind of violence a little bit stronger. But also, like, you get... So for a really long time in the Bond films, you get this sense of it being revolutionary, and I guess, like, not revolution... Revolutionary makes it sound really dramatic. It's... What is the term? Like, pushing the envelope, I guess?
It's not subversive.
It's very, like, ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Especially for, like, the 60s and the 70s. But then, I say the 60s mostly, because then when you get into the 70s and when the Bond formula kind of starts, like, you know, being like, okay, Bond starts to replicate other genres and other things. So you get Live and Let Die, which pulls very strongly from blaxploitation, and then you get like Moonraker, which pulls from like I don't know what Moonraker pulls from, but
Star Wars came out.
That's
and
what it
space was cool. That's what it was.
Star Wars came out and space was cool, and then so it kept kind of going that reactionary direction. Then, but then you move to this kind of new Bond, which I think is fascinating because the new Bond kind of goes back around to the model of the Sean Connery Bonds with Daniel Craig.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird cyclical thing too, because the new Bond, it's very referential to old Bond, but it also draws a lot on stuff like the Bourne Identity and that kind of new idea of a spy, which was in and of itself a reaction to like Bond and stuff existing. So there's like a cyclical thing going on too. Yeah,
100%. And like it's also really interesting because it moving from being like very revolutionary to very reactionary to the times around it. Bond's also interesting because it's been all in-house. Like it's kind of like Playboy magazine a little bit, or like, you know, Playboy magazine, you get Hugh Hefner running it and now his daughter runs Bond. So you get the Broccoli family.
Hugh Hefner's daughter runs Bond?
I mean, sorry, Hugh Hefner's daughter running Playboy.
That would be amazing.
My bad.
Actually.
I would be so into that. But yeah, so the Bond films were all owned by the Broccoli family. Yes, the Broccoli family. That was correct.
Yeah.
The name's Broccoli.
Albert R. Broccoli.
Is that his full name? Because I just know him as the Broccoli's.
Yeah.
And so, they produced all the films, and then the daughter, Barbara Broccoli, who produces them now, she came on as, like, I think, like, a continuity script supervisor person for Live and Let Die, I want to say, and then she just kind of climbed the ranks until she completely took over the franchise, and that's so fascinating to me, because Bond is something that's blanket misogynistic, or, like, treated as if it's blanket misogynist. And, like, I think it's interesting that, like, people watch the Daniel Craig Bonds and they're like, garbage, trash, men are horrible. But it's a woman is at the helm, and not in a way of a traditional producer where it's like, I'm just throwing money at this franchise, but in a way where it's in-house and it's been a part of her life her entire life. And so she's very probably creatively involved.
Yeah.
And so that's very fascinating to me, that then the woman who's running Bond would go back to the Sean Connery model of the first Bond films.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
And kind of, I feel like as we delve into stuff, it'll kind of, that picture will become clearer, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And so we won't, we're at, but that's all.
Yes,
same. That's it, that's all I had to say. Did you ever see, if you guys want a really good spy parody that kind of like introduces you to the basic formula of a spy movie, watch Danger 5. It's
I don't know if that's
so good.
That's a parody of a lot of things.
Yeah, that's fair, but I see it as like a spy parody primarily.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I see it a lot of things in it, but spy isn't like the first thing that jumps out at me.
I think the spy is the basic formula of the show, and the way it's so repetitive, like, reminds me very strongly of like Bond films and spy films. So yeah. Also, like, it's interesting to talk too how, like, you know, when we're thinking about like the new superhero age, I suppose. I was having a conversation about this with my mentor because I just taught Goldfinger in like the intro to narrative film class, and we were talking about how with James Bond, he kind of functioned as this superhero-like figure to people before the superhero genre came up. Like, he fit the same cultural space in the 60s as, like, we see Marvel characters fitting the cultural space now.
And also, I feel like spies kind of have become, like, to modern society what cowboys were at some point, like, in terms of genre and everything.
Yeah.
Also, like, this is just like a weird crackhead revelation that I just had. But like another big like filmic wheelhouse of mine is like Japanese tokusatsu films or shows and films.
Which I know nothing about.
And if you look at the early like 1971 Kamen Rider shows, a lot of the structure and style of those shows are very like weirdly James Bond influenced, because
when
you have
say
like
that kind of film, you're talking like Ultraman, right?
Yeah, sorta. Yeah, like
the
like
way I notice it, and I don't know if it's like a specific stylistic thing, but like visually they look very similar.
Yeah, but like I was thinking, like specifically with Kamen Rider, they have this whole element of like the bad guys are a shadowy secret espionage organization with these underground bases and these like big devices and stuff. So there's like a kung fu hero and these monsters in suits, but at the conflict is pretty much exactly the same as a Bond movie.
That's very
and that like
just
like came out to my mind like right now, and I don't know if we need to come back to that later.
That's a really good way to look at it. You know what else I kind of like was thinking too? Because with all the James Bond movies, it's interesting to go through them because all of them are pretty much the exact same formula, the exact same thing. It's like it's literally like clockwork, the exact same thing. So thinking about and doing thought experiment as to how this has lasted so long and still managed to be interesting, I think it all comes down to the characters, but even deeper than that, I think it comes down to like the Bond women, because they're so interesting. Because like James Bond is kind of a pretty similar entity the entire time, but I'm also kind of thinking they also almost kind of replicate the same kind of storytelling structure as like the early Sherlock Holmes novels, books.
Yeah.
Because like each and every one of those, you could pick out any which one, watch it, or read it, and then like be able to completely like get the story and understand it, because there's no overarching like thing to it. Yeah. And while you get that with Spectre introduced in Bond, I think each Bond works really well if you were to just want to watch one of them. So you don't necessarily have to start from the beginning and get to the end to understand any of them individually.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of it too.
Yeah.
Because we also get the talk of like, Bond is huge for dudes, right?
But I mean, depending on the dudes.
Because like he's just a kind of a clumsy fool. We'll talk about that specifically during the episode. I mean, love him the most, but
which I guess that kind of like this leaps ahead a little bit, but there's also like with the multiple actors that kind of does this like mythologizing thing, where like Sean Connery is Bond and he's this like smooth talking but sometimes very rough and tumble guy who like gets the crap beat out of him a lot but always comes out on top. And then like you have like Roger Moore being a much more like English guy who's a little more, I don't know, a little more not standoffish but kind of that way. And then like Timothy Dalton being like a guy who will just like find you and beat the crap out of you with no reservations whatsoever. And like so it's like different interpretations on the same character. So it almost starts to feel like just varying accounts of this one guy in very different contexts. Yeah,
that's a good point. Because I'm of the belief. Yeah, I get it. There's a book series. That's cool. That's cute. But I really like thinking of it as it being like a code name. Because that's really interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book also, so I can't be like, well, also, he's like, this in the book.
I can't remember exactly like the specifics, but another interesting thing is how like I'm pretty sure he like started writing more books because of the popularity of the film series.
That's
and then after Fleming died, they started doing like original stories that were sort of based on books they hadn't adapted and like mishmashing things. And there was an interesting, I read License to Kill, and they adapted that into the books, into the like book continuity, and it was interesting because they had things that the movie took from the books happening again in the book's continuity, and Bond was like dwelling on the fact that his friend got eaten by sharks twice and how horrible that must be for him. And
my god!
It was just this really interesting meta thing, but like just the like interplay between the like literary and the film is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think often like it's really interesting because we often think that constraints equal like an inability to explore. But I think the formulaic nature of Bond provides more of an opportunity to explore.
Yeah.
Like things like meta-cinema, things like interacting with the changing world around, you know.
Yeah, because even these films start playing on themselves pretty much like almost from day one.
Yeah.
Which
100%.
Is weird because there's like not even a formula and they're already playing with their own formula.
Yeah, which is so fascinating. It kind of like it reminds me of like German cinema, like in the context of all of film, where like you start with something like German expressionism and it's like playing with the formula already of like what it is to make a film, and then it kind of you kind of get that similar thing with Bond. But yeah, so that is a very brief history of the spy genre. Do you have any thoughts, Evelyn?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could talk about spy video games forever.
Oh my god, yeah,
talk
like about spy video games a little bit.
I don't know. Like,
there's a lot of Bond games, right?
Yeah, there's a few. I'll talk about that more.
I'm just like coughing and
don't die.
Jeez.
I'll talk about it more when we get to From Russia with Love, but it's interesting that a lot of people like of a certain age group are more familiar with the video game adaptation of that than the film itself.
From Russia with Love?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like everybody's like, oh, From Russia with Love is like the best Bond, and it's definitely because they played the video game. Because I don't know about best Bond.
It's pretty. It's
just
not
too
bad.
slow for me.
Yeah. Yeah,
we can talk about From Russia with Love yet, but we'll talk about that in 2 days. Tom.
But also, I find it interesting how Bond inadvertently gave rise to a lot of the like notable female video game characters.
Oh,
because you have like I don't know if it's as direct, but with Tomb Raider and like as they kind of start characterizing Lara Croft, she very much starts to feel sort of Bondish in this kind of like upper class jet set person who also goes on these adventures. But then in a lot of like spy parody type games, you get Kate Archer from the No One Lives Forever, which is like a straight up Austin Powers type parody with a female lead, or Perfect Dark, which was literally like, we made a Bond game and we don't have the license anymore, so we'll make a Bond game without Bond, and they have this other like very notable female lead.
Yeah.
And so like,
wow.
Just in the context of like us talking about Bond as masculinity, it's interesting that like when Bond is referenced in games, that kind of character and genre are thought of as more like compatible with feminine characters.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, the like kind of all over the place spectrum it is of Bond being empowering, because like I've been a woman who has been very empowered by Bond women. Like I remember the Halle Berry Bond was a big moment for me because it was just nice seeing like a woman who like looked like me being in that role, because like I've always been really empowered by people like Bond women and things like that. But I know a lot of women who are very empowered by the James Bond figure, like taking on that like persona. I know a lot of women are empowered by that, and that's very interesting to me too.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's women indulging in like, oh my god, I hate this term, male power fantasy. I don't think it's women indulging in that. I think it's something else, especially watching the Bond films and seeing that Bond isn't even really showcasing the male power fantasy.
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah.
That's something I think people put onto Bond.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's... There is, like, in terms of like I don't know, like... Because a lot of times films make things... Like, there are physicalities to things that, like, sort of implicitly gender things. But with espionage, it's a very cerebral thing, and I think that makes it a lot more, like, gender neutral on some level.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, I think it goes back to the formulaic a little bit, because, like, with something so formulaic, it's easy, I think, to, like, place yourself onto it or find bits of it that fit yourself, I guess.
Yeah.
You know? But, yeah. So, history of the spy genre.
We didn't talk that much about North by Northwest, but, you know...
We didn't, but, like, we talked about the important parts.
We've talked about North by Northwest on here before. We have to have...
If I'm, like, thinking about it, I honestly think most of the time we've talked about it, it's been me being, like, I want to talk about not North by Northwest, because that's the Hitchcock movie
I've talked about North by Northwest a lot, so, I mean, well, you know.
Excellent. Do you want to go into it a little bit? Do you want to talk about it?
I don't know. North by Northwest, it was good. Hitchcock has this formula where he kind of makes the same movies over and over, just like slightly different. And North by Northwest is like the fourth movie he did in that mold, and for some reason it's the one that caught on. Which
honestly, I'm gonna be completely real here, as a filmmaker who like is getting to the point where she's like, wow, I'm just repeating the same thing, aren't I? Hitchcock makes me feel great about myself, because I'm like, oh, it's fine.
If you watch the 39 Steps, The Saboteur,
North by Northwest, and then
Foreign Correspondent also, and then North by Northwest,
and they are like a little bit. Lifeboat has a feel that's similar,
but yeah, like those four movies, like they are pretty much the same. Like they even all have like a variation on that running from a plane in the cornfield thing, because I think in one of them it's like there's like a car, and in one of them it's a helicopter.
Yeah.
And in one of them it's a plane again, but it's in Scotland.
In the Timothy Leary, like a Cary Grant short where they do acid, when the plane comes around, it's his mom. And there's a detail on the plane, and it's like her face is like the plane with like the nose, but she has all these hair curlers around her, and then that kills me. She's like, why did you abandon me? And Cary Grant's like, Mom, I was a boy, I had no choice. Man, that's a crazy short. Did that suffice our North by Northwest conversation?
Also, like, it really influenced Metal Gear Solid. We'll just get that out of the way. So I've mentioned Metal Gear.
Metal Gear once.
I got it out.
Death Stranding thoughts?
I haven't played it yet, so I'm deliberately reserving my thoughts. And oh man, is it like, I'm hearing people talk about it, and they're like, oh yeah, you have to put 36 hours into this game before it really starts going. And I'm like, oh, cool.
That's every game. You know how long Heavy Rain opening feels? Feels like 700 years.
Yeah.
But when I'm almost out of energy, I recharge with a Monster.
I mean,
me too. But thank you all so much for joining us for our first day of 007 December.
I feel like we got a lot out, so now we're like fresh,
now we're ready.
Clean.
We're clean. We're pure again. We got baptized during this episode. And then we'll see you tomorrow to talk Dr. No. Woo, 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 woo. Okay, bye everyone. Bye.